Good evening, and welcome to the March 11, 2015 edition of the Pullman School District Board of Directors meeting. First item on our agenda is the flag salute, so if you please join us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome.
The next item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Are there any corrections, additions, or changes that need to be made this evening?
No, just to mention that Director Weed is home ill this evening, and President Everman will be here shortly. He had a conflict that couldn't make it on time, so he'll join us as soon as he can. And just draw your attention to the fact that we do have a executive session at the end of the board meeting tonight, but no changes.
Okay. Does any member have any changes, corrections, or additions? No. If there are no objections.
I'll move approval of the
Okay.
agenda as.
I'll second.
It's been properly
yeah.
moved and seconded to approve the agenda as it was presented. Are there any comments, questions about that? If not, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. This moves us to the portion of the agenda for visitors. This part of the agenda is for anyone wishing to speak before the board, either as an individual or as a member of the group. Visitors addressing the board will go to the microphone, state their name, address, and prior to presenting their information, visitors are asked to limit their remarks to 3 minutes, and the board will listen but not discuss the topic at this time. But the board may consider moving the topic presented to a future meeting date as a discussion item. Is there anyone that would like to come up and speak to the board at this time under the visitors? Seeing nobody moving fast toward the podium, I didn't expect that.
Or even moving slowly.
We'll move on from the visitors section of our agenda to reports, correspondence, and programs. And the first item under that is board reports. Carl, do you have a report for us this evening?
Other than just an observer's report, luckily I have some time on my hands and can watch the construction. It's really fun. I was joking with Assistant Superintendent Maxwell a minute ago about chatting with the not the foreman of the whole job, but the person that tells everybody what to do. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was to draw your attention to a really nice post that was on Facebook that Kristen Walker put on, and that was thanking the people of Pullman for providing the new locker rooms and offering a really vivid contrast to the previous conditions before it started to be renovated, down to the mouse nest that had been last season in the toe of her croc, and which is pretty inhospitable environment considering it's all plastic, but they found that. So she was, if I'll paraphrase it a little bit, particularly happy that there was a separation. Of course, she's the assistant track coach, has been for a long time assisting Mike, and the separation between the female and male facilities, which that had been hard to do for track before, and also the fact that there was a place where the women and could hang out and just have some time to discuss as coaches. There really wasn't any room to do that before, and so that was, I thought that was really nice that she thanked the school and the community for providing those new facilities. So and I understand from the foreman that they're pretty near done, but they're gonna finish some of the items, there's punch list and so on, during spring vacation when there'll be less usage of the facility. But I'm really glad that we got in there, almost on schedule. It was supposed to be the 15th of March, right? But we were in there, and
No, we were supposed to be moved out of the high school locker rooms on Monday, this last Monday, and we were. So
Yeah.
we're right on schedule.
whatever it was, he said that they had a few things to do, but they were in full use, and I noticed they're already ripping off the roof to part of the old gymnasium and so on, and started on the reconstruction there. So anyway, it's fun to watch the project going up.
Thank you, Carl. Much appreciated for that report. I have no report this evening. Allison, do you have a report?
Other than just a hearty congratulations to our high school science bowl
Oh,
team
yeah.
who
Absolutely.
was invited to nationals for, I believe they said, the last 13 out of 14 years. Free trip to Washington, D.C. Big honor for our schools.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Sturm, it's time for the superintendent's report.
Thank you. We have, just to remind everyone that tomorrow evening at Lincoln Middle School, 5:30 to 7:30 is the 5th grade camp spaghetti feed. So we're getting close to that time of year, if you can believe it, close to 5th grade camp. And so we run a fundraiser and social event at this time every year. And so that's, I believe it's 5:30 to 7:30. I'm looking at Cameron over there, yeah, getting the nod. So that's coming up tomorrow. I just wanted to send a letter down. We had Bob nominated Paula Bates, one of our classified employees, as for school employee, classified school employee of the year. She was. There's a pretty competitive field, but she does a fabulous job for us and has for a number of years in the area of special education and other special programs. And so we wanted to at least recognize her. She didn't make the cut at the regional level, but we all think she should have. So.
She should have won it.
Yeah. If they would come down and watch her work, she would have won. And this is, I will also send this down, let's see, I'm trying to figure out when we have, well, I'll give you a preview. We may talk about it again next time, but March 16th through 22nd is the school retirees appreciation week. So I'll just take this opportunity to mention our school retirees, and actually Bob and I have been invited to speak to that group on the, I believe it's the 23rd of March. Correct. So those two things match up really well. We can appreciate them in person, and so that's coming up. Construction, I'll just kind of take off of some things that Carl mentioned. You know, a big part of one of the things that we've struggled with for almost as soon as the building was built was compliance with Title IX. And so you mentioned the separation and the equivalent facilities down there, and those are being taken care of in the main building right now. The roof that you see coming off is over the existing, locker rooms, and so they've already almost completely demoed the indoor locker rooms, and so construction will begin on those shortly. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
And so that whole Title IX, but I've heard nothing but positive comments about the locker rooms down there under the stadium building, and they were in pretty poor shape prior to that. So that's a real neat addition, and to have something nearly finished. There'll be some pieces that will need to be finished after we move back into the locker rooms in the main building. but they're minor, mostly equipment and furnishings that will go back in there. You might notice that they've started framing the main gym, so that it's starting to look like a box now, and instead of Tinker Toys.
I did ask him about how come none of the ironwork is all being sheeted with aluminum for the construction purposes, and why it wasn't sealed, and he said, well, there's a few places where it will be, but you don't have to seal the iron if it's going to be inside and sheeted, I mean, from any overly exposed to moisture and so on, and the whole thing is going to be wrapped before any of the siding goes on, and so on. So, but so the actual attachment of the siding and so on goes into aluminum rather than having to compromise the strength of the iron superstructure of the whole thing. It's really interesting construction.
So, you know, the whole phase one is really making good progress. I don't know if we completely have footings, but we're getting close to having all of the footings in phase one in place. And of course, many of the walls are already starting to come up. And when I say a lot of the phase one you can't see unless you can get into the site and see the east side of the school, and that's where the theater and the commons and the cafeteria and the kitchen will be, and those footings are almost completely finished in there, and so they'll start coming up out of the ground with that part of the building soon. And you know, there's always something that comes up that needs to be problem solved, but nothing earth-shattering at this point. I mean, kind of to be expected with especially a phased project. I did get an email just this afternoon. We've been talking about, we've been keeping close track on change orders, and we've been emailing back and forth, just making sure that we're monitoring that our project manager is monitoring that, and without a crystal ball, at least at this point, we're progressing in good shape. We're still in positive territory, as a matter of fact, in terms of more positive, more credits than costs. So, in our change orders so far, which we anticipated trying to do early on in the project to find some ways to reduce costs in construction and save some time, because the schedule's pretty tight. So that's looking good, and I think that's all I have. Bob or Dan, do you have anything?
I have just
you
two really announcements and just acknowledgments. So Monday night we had our Title I lap information night, and we had 13 parents attend, which has been better than in past, and it was a good turnout. And I want to appreciate the Title I lab teachers that attended. That was nice to have them there, and very helpful to the conversation. I want to thank Cameron for, again, letting us use the space and having everything set up, ready, so I just had to walk in and flip on the computer. So it was very well done. At this particular time, we're also surveying our Title I lab parents to get more feedback regarding our program and how we can look forward to addressing maybe some of the barriers and improve on some of the positive things that are happening with our program. The 13 parents, most were elementary. 7 surveys were completed Monday night at the event. Most parents were new to the program, and that's why they attended the family night. They were very supportive of the program. Again, they appreciate more communication, maybe having a session on how parents can help their kids at home in reading and math, so that's something we'll look at. And would really like a summer program. So We have also received 34 surveys from the middle school parents, students participating in our LAP program. And again, very similar, very appreciative overall support for the building. Interesting, a lot of the comments were the program helps build student confidence in reading and math. They would like more assistance in teaching responsibility and organization. Who would have thought at the middle school level that would be two areas to improve on? So, as a parent of a middle schooler myself, I would. So very well attended, good feedback. So I just wanted to update you on that. And again, I thank the staff publicly for their assistance in that program. Second thing I just wanted to mention quickly was the consolidated program review is wrapping up. We have just a few items that we need to bring up to compliance. And I want to just thank the staff again publicly for working on that. And we have 45 days, well, less than 45 days now to get those items uploaded to OSPI. And we're working hard on that and getting ready for all the things that we need to do in spring. So.
Thanks, Bob. And I think the last item I have here is enrollment. Since we're early in March and haven't had a board meeting since the count date, we're down one from last month, so that's good. We're stabilizing. We actually dropped, if you remember, we dropped considerably between December and January. Came up about 10 in February, and then now we're holding. So our average right now is full-time equivalent is 2477.74, and we'll see if we hold that average for the rest of the year. If you recall, we just agreed to build our budget for next year on 2470. So our average FTE right now is one more than 100 more than it's 101 more than it was at the end of the year last year. So we're holding at that kind of 100 FTE mark increase. So that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sturm. Before I turn the gavel back over to Dr. Everman, do you have a board report for us this evening?
Let's see. I did have something. Oh yeah, I wanted, but someone already might have mentioned this from the board. The PHS Science Bowl wins the trip to DC. Was that already mentioned?
Allison mentioned
Okay.
that. Yes.
All right. Then,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'll turn the gavel back over to you. We are at number 6, the consent agenda.
Thank you, sir.
Mhm.
First of all, I apologize for being late this evening, but I was fortunate enough to have a capable vice president who stepped right in. Yeah, that's nice. I might have to do this more often.
Yeah. Don't get used to it, Jim.
As the weather gets better, of course.
Okay, okay.
All right, our next item is the consent agenda, where we group some things to expedite our business. This will include the minutes from past meetings, transfer request, records destruction, warrants, and personnel reports. Is there anything that the board would like to pull from this consent agenda, or can we vote on it as a group?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay.
I'll second.
Oh.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. We have a few action items this evening. These are items that we have previously discussed at meetings, and so now it's time for us to take action, but we still have opportunities to ask questions. So our first item is enrollment projections for 2015-16 by Dan Hornfeld, our Executive Director of Support Services.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As Dr. Sturm mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, we brought before the board in presentation at the last board meeting a recommendation to go with 2,470 FTE for the fiscal year 15-16. That's after quite a bit of analysis on where we think we'll be next year. We're comfortable with that number. knowing that we may adjust to that as we realize what enrollment turns out to be next September. But we do bring to the board tonight recommendation for approval of 2470 for the next fiscal year.
Any questions for Dan on that? How would the board like to proceed with this?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the board approve the 2,470 FTE for the 2015-16 budget construction.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Allison. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the 2015-16 enrollment projections at 2470. Any further discussion from the board? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And our next action item is Policy 6000, Program Planning, Budget Preparation, Adoption, and Implementation by Dr. Stern.
Thank you. And this policy 6000 is an existing policy that had some minor edits recommended by our policy sample from WASDA. And make this a little bit bigger so I can see it. Just defines the fiscal year there. And then this was a late change from what you saw last. I believe this is it. Yeah, this language, we cleared this up a little bit thanks to Allison, who read this and it didn't make a whole lot of sense, so we made a clarification and changed at the end of January to beginning in January of each year, projections for the ending fund balance will be presented. As we discussed, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to project ending fund balance much before that. This is when we start receiving our allocation based on our average enrollment rather than budget. So, yeah.
The assumption would be, Dan, that as a member of the Finance Committee, I just get that in writing because we don't necessarily meet monthly. So you just...
A lot of times those projections are even discussed when we talk about year end.
Yeah.
And we look forward to the next year. So those will be covered from that period on.
And that's also, isn't that in your monthly information report?
Yeah.
So you get it every month, even before January.
Yeah.
So
I just didn't want to get tied into the word monthly being something where it had to be during a meeting of the Finance Committee, since it called that out as a body. But if it can just be done on a regular basis, monthly,
Well, I think
in writing, then we get it.
yeah,
I think you have a good point though, because we do the budget status report every month
yeah.
in the board packet. So
Okay.
other than any other conversation, that would certainly cover that.
So we're actually do more than what
The policy
requires.
Yes.
And then the other piece, we had quite a bit of discussion about our capital projects fund and maintaining rather than 300,000, 200,000, but actually not using that as a revolving account, but actually putting it there for emergencies and budgeting in the general fund for items that we plan for. And so then we would move money out of the general fund if we had to do a capital projects fund rather than spend out of this 200,000. And I believe that is the extent of the changes in 6,000, other than some numbering and edits and policy and statute citations there.
Thank you, Dr. Stern. Any questions for Paul on this? Any further questions, we should say, or Dan? If not, how would the board like to proceed with this?
I would move to approve revisions to policy 6,000.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the revisions to policy 6,000, program planning, budget preparation, adoption, and implementation. Is there any further discussion from the board? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. And then our last action item this evening is the construction change orders from Dr. Stern.
Yes, and we went back and forth on this one quite a few times, and let's see, we had one. We added this language to 6950, I believe. Let me go back to my. We're asking the board to consider deleting 6957, which was a standalone policy on change orders. WASDA sample policies have placed that item into policy 6950 and simplified it and given us a little more flexibility so we don't hang up progress on the project when change orders come along. And we added, again thanks to Allison on our policy committee, we added this last phrase to clarify that change orders will not exceed the approved contingency or extend its original scope, or finally change a distinctive design characteristic. The board approves the design, so we understand that as staff, but we wanted to make sure that it was clarified in the policy so that there was no question about that.
Comments, questions for Dr. Stern on the change order? We've been kind of deliberating over this for the last couple of meetings, so thank you, Allison, for doing the revisions.
So again, there's
So we're actually
two possible.
voting on two of these items, and removal of one policy and approval of revisions to the second policy, 6950.
I started off by moving approval of deletion policy 6957.
I'll second that.
Okay. So we'll take these as separate entities and any further discussion on the approval for deletion of the policy 6957? Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, against? So now we move on with the deliberation on policy 6950, the revisions made.
Allison?
I would move approval of revisions to policy 6950.
I'll second that one.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the revisions made to policy 6950, which are the construction change orders. But actually, is this title correct in contractor assurances and security bonds and insurance?
That is the title of the policy, yes.
Okay.
And it has it has the change orders folded into this policy. Yes.
Okay.
So the rest of the policy really talks about surety bonds and
Okay.
contractor
So
assurances.
we've been kind of abbreviating that inappropriately. It should be policy 6950, contractor assurances, security bonds, and insurance, of which construction change orders is part of that. So it's been moved and seconded that we approve this. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? All right. Good. Thank you very much. And now we have quite a few discussion items this evening. So it starts with Dr. Sturm on the 2015-16 board meeting calendar.
Thank you, and you can, you've had a chance to review that calendar, and I believe it mirrors what our practice has been for the last few years, and lines out 2 board meetings a month, the second and the fourth Wednesday. Our work sessions the first Wednesday of the month, with a few exceptions in there having to do with Thanksgiving and the WASDA annual conference in November, so we only have 1 board meeting that month. And July is a tentative, and December, I believe there's only 1 because we have a special meeting early in the month with our legislators, and then 1 board meeting, and then winter break we do not have a board meeting. So those 3, I believe, exceptions to regular two board meetings a month.
You don't realize how busy we are until you look at the calendar.
And these are just the regular meetings.
Just the regular, not the special meetings. Yeah. Okay. And February 16 will also be levy, is that correct?
Yes, the levy election.
Levy elections.
Time flies.
I know.
Seems
I
like
know.
you just
I know. This is
finished the levy.
amazing. Okay. So do we have any questions for Dr. Sturm on the 2015-16 calendar, besides being very, very busy? Okay. So we'll move on then to the next item, which is the policy 2161, special education and related services for eligible students by Dr. Maxwell.
Yes, we have a host of policies today to look at. So we'll start off with a warm-up with the easier ones to look at. Most of the top 4 will be some minor revisions as far as the only updates. In 2161, this was brought earlier in the year, but now it's been updated to include new cross-references and 2 new legal references. Those were the only changes in this particular policy. And they're noted there in red. So,
Any questions for Bob on this one? All right.
okay.
All right, Bob. We'll move on to the next one then, which is policy 3211, transgender students.
Yes, thank you. So again, this was another new policy. The only update is the addition of a cross-referenced policy in this, which is noted under cross-references. And that's cross-references suicide prevention, which is another new updated policy, not in your packet this time. We'll be bringing that in the future. So just to let you know, there will be some changes with the suicide prevention policy, but I met with the counselors and school psychologists today. We had a short discussion on that. We'll be meeting to review that and then bringing that back to the policy committee and to the school board.
Comments, questions for Bob? No? Okay. Our next policy then for discussion is also Dr. Maxwell, policy 2162, education of students with disabilities under section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act.
Thank you. Yes, and again, this one, no changes in the content of the policy, other than it's just updating it to reflect the cross-references and legal updates.
questions for Bob on that one? No? Okay. Our next item is 2107, Comprehensive Early Literacy Plan.
Right, this is a brand new policy that comes out of new legislation from last year, and this is also referred to as, sometimes you may hear of the changes to the Learning Assistance Program or LAP program. And so this one does have some significant new content, and number one is the use of annual screening assessments and other assessments to identify at-risk readers. Really, there's no change other than we already have screeners in place, we already have assessments in place, but this is just requiring it in a legal reference. The second is really a push to make sure that we're using research-based family involvement and engagement strategies to include those resources that can help parents and guardians learn to assist their students in reading and early literacy at home. And that is a component not only of our Learning Assistance Program, but also of our Title I program. Then the other major additional change is at the third grade level, anyone that scores a level 1 on the ELA, which is English Language Arts Assessment, if they score level 1, then there's a requirement that the student's teacher, principal, or designee and parent and guardian have to meet and discuss appropriate grade level placement and intensive reading strategies to address that student's needs in reading and early literacy. One other thing with this one, it does require that in grades K through 4, that on the report card at the end of the year, we have to note whether that student is on standard in reading or below standard in reading or exempt from that. And there are two groups that are exempt from on the report card of reporting that, and that's English language learners and special education students. So this one's quite comprehensive, but I tried to hit the high points in there for you. So.
Thoughts for Dr. Maxwell on this one?
Just
Questions?
I can't remember, and I was looking to see if I could find it, but what happens for students who do not take the statewide assessment?
There's no mention in the law for those students that do not take the state assessment. I would imagine then we're going to have to look at how the student is responding to our local assessments, our core assessments.
Third graders also take an assessment for numeracy or math too. Is there a similar?
There's nothing in this for math, so.
So if you score 1 at math, there's no special meeting or?
No.
Okay.
This applies only to reading.
Not yet.
Right.
And there is, by the way, 2 bills currently that address changes to this one.
Oh, no.
So I don't know
Does-
what's going to happen with this or not. So
Would anything about this create an incentive to put a student in special ed or some of these other categories?
I don't think so. Just because you score a level 1 doesn't mean you necessarily would be eligible for special education. Most likely you would probably be eligible for either Title I or LAP, possibly. But I don't know if we might see some more referrals possibly.
Do you have any sense of what proportion of third graders might score a level 1?
We took a quick look at our latest MAP, measurement of progress, and it looks like it's lower than we anticipated. So that could be a good sign, but that's also a different assessment.
Yeah.
So I'd be really going out on a ledge to try to give you information based on assessment. This will be the first time we've ever tried.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how many kids are actually going to score a level 1 at grade 3. I will say with the interim assessments that we're using, they align very well with our English language core curriculum, Storytown, at the elementary level. So it's been reported by the third grade and fourth grade teachers that have done the interim assessments with their students. The students feel pretty confident because it's a familiar format.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something that to be optimistic about.
Okay.
But that's a great question. I think that's the unknown right now.
Yeah, this is a big policy.
It's a big policy and it throws in everything. I mean,
Yeah.
this talks about behavior. It does reference math, but only in the state's supposed to put out a guide of best practices in math, which they have not completed yet.
Okay.
So it does reference math a little bit, but there's no testing ramifications for math or scoring a level 1. But they are looking at revamping this again. So you may see me here next year with the same policy.
We don't want to let the ink dry.
Thank you for answering all my questions.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions for Bob on this policy 2107? We move on to 2150 then, co-curricular programs. Bob.
Yes, this is co-curricular program. Again, most of the changes in this are to update the cross-references and legal references per WASDA's recommendations. And a primary revision in this is a theme that you'll see through several of these policies, and that's including a non-discrimination statement.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Thoughts or questions for Bob on this one? No? Okay. Our next one is policy 2151, interscholastic activities.
Thank you. And again, to summarize, that one's really looking at equity and non-discrimination as well. It's summarizing the distribution of funds, inclusions of students with disabilities, particularly in sports. Again, this is linked to Title IX. And you can see, again, there's a big non-discrimination section of new language. And it also mentions the annual athletic evaluation and student athletic interest survey, which we already do. We do those two things. This is just showing up in this particular policy, but that is something that we already currently do and has been a requirement. And it also references facilities language, but it's just, again, updating what's already been in place.
I have questions about the example of separate facilities for training rooms and whether we've made provisions for that. That just, I've never considered that the training room was one or the other. Is it possible for it to be a unisex facility
Oh,
and staffed?
absolutely, yeah. We could
So
have the
if you
similar
have
space.
one, you have to have one for the other. Is that what this
If it's
language means?
if it's different, an example would be if you have boys baseball field dugouts need to be very similar in quality to girls softball dugouts, as an example.
Didn't make myself clear. I understand that
Oh.
about those kinds of facilities. I was particularly wondering about the one training room that we have. Like, normally that's where you go and get treatment for, you get taped up and so on.
Yeah.
I know we've only had one here, and I was asking whether in our new facility we have one training room
Oh.
or can it be a co-curricular facility with provision for privacy if you have to
I think as long as
undress
there's,
and so on?
yeah, as long as if you only have one facility, there has to be an equal access to that.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, and Dr. Stern may know more about the plans. I haven't looked
Well,
at the training
I
facility to
wouldn't
see
have
if we
thought
have
that we
to.
would, because it's enough to try and get adequate equipment and so on. It's
Yes.
very expensive and so on. The idea of a high school having two separate but equal training rooms is maybe something for WSU to do and so on, but
Yeah.
certainly not here. We haven't had an adequate facility. It's been clustered there underneath the stairs in the gymnasium and
Mhm.
open pipes and so on and so forth, but that was what both genders
We're using.
were using,
Yeah.
and that's where the staff that we hire and the staff that we have on staff perform their duties and so on. So since it was included in the language as an example of
Yep.
where it had to be provision of separate facilities, I didn't see it fitting with toilets, showers as other examples, so.
Yeah.
And the final phrase in that statement is your, if it needs to be separate, you have to schedule it equitably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you had one,
Okay.
one specific facility for.
I was just in the background, I was
Yeah.
reading the background, although the language is the same, it still uses those as examples. And in my experience with high schools here and everywhere else in 43 years of officiating, I've certainly seen separate showers and toilets, that's understood, but one school training room for each high school or whatever. The middle school, I think, only has one place where we have tables to tape and so on, and we built that fairly recently, 10 years ago, but, okay.
Okay.
Any further comments for Dr. Maxwell on that one? 2151.
No, I'd just like to make a correction on page 79. All the references to the policy need to be policy 2151. Right there. Well, oh, okay. It all is on my packet. It's 2150. It must have got changed.
It was fixed on, I believe, Monday.
Okay, that's why.
Yeah.
Hard to get one buyer.
'Cause
Well,
I-
I thought that.
Good try, Dean.
I downloaded it last week. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We caught that
Well,
one.
thanks
That's what
for.
you get for being prompt.
Okay. So our next one then, it will be for Dr. Maxwell as well. Policy 3207, prohibition of harassment, intimidation, and bullying.
We'll give you
Yes, and this comes out of, as referenced in the background, out of on October 21st, the Office of Civil Rights sent out a Dear Colleague letter, and they've recommended the revision to this 13207. And this is specific to required actions when harassment, intimidation, bullying against a student with an IEP or Section 504 plan. In this case, then, a team meeting would be required to determine if the incident had an impact on the student's ability to receive a free and appropriate public education, and if so, what additional services or supports would need to be provided.
And there was a comment in the policy news to note that the harassment, intimidation, and bullying has to be proven before there's a requirement.
Before there's a requirement, it's
So
true.
it's not just an allegation that triggers the meeting. There has to be a proven.
Thank you for pointing that out, yeah. So if it's proven, then only would we be required to meet and then see if there was an impact.
What does proven?
Means that it actually occurred.
Occurred.
Okay.
It's not an allegation. So typically there's an allegation of harassment, intimidation, or bullying, and that triggers an investigation. Through that investigation, the finding is either that it occurred or it didn't, and if it did occur, then
It's
that would
proven. Okay.
that would trigger this section of the policy.
Questions, comments?
And I believe that's the language used in the law.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounded familiar, but I just didn't know what that would mean in
Yeah.
practice.
Any further questions for Bob on this one? You're doing good, Bob.
Oh, I'm hanging in there, so it was a
Policy
lot of
30
fun going through all these. so.
Policy 3210, non-discrimination.
Yeah, again, 3210 non-discrimination. This is revisions were made to reflect policy recommendations and update cross-references and legal references made by WASDA. So they include the primary revisions are revised non-discrimination statement to match the federal. And it will be included in all written announcements, notices, recruitment materials, employment applications, and other publications made available to parents, students, or employees. And non-discrimination statement, of course, will not discriminate in any programs or activities based on identified categories. And the name and contact information of district's compliance and Section 504 compliance officer have to be noted in that statement. Again, this one is going back to requiring us to mirror the federal non-discrimination statement. It has to be included in all major public announcements that we would send home. So an example would be if the school sent home a newsletter, that needs to be in the newsletter. It has to be in our job postings, which they are. The statement is in our job postings. And since I'm the compliance officer for all three categories, my name and contact information has to be included in the non-discrimination statement. This would also be in a school handbook, as an example.
Seems like it's getting longer.
It's getting longer
I know
and
we
longer.
can't do anything about it, so I'm just going to comment, but yeah.
Well, I suppose we should point out that we did do something about it and we got our hands slapped for it.
We did, yeah, but that's all right. I felt like we made a statement, and that's okay. So
Sometimes you gotta hold your ground.
we held our ground, and then they told us change it.
For a while, anyway.
So it felt good for about 2 seconds.
You have
but-
to decide what hill you're going to die on.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about this. but-
There's no point really.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. All right, we're down to our next to the last one, policy 3231, student records.
Yes, student records. Again, a minor change to this. This is already current practice, but we added, and it's exactly what's underlined, the district will retain records in compliance with the current approved versions of the local government general records retention schedule and school districts and educational service district records retention schedule, which we already follow those two. This is just simply placing the title of those two schedules into our policy.
Good clarification. Okay. And our last one this evening is policy 3247, isolation and restraint of students with IEPs or section 504 plans.
Yes, thank you. And this is one that also came up new this year earlier, and I was surprised to see it come up again. And the only very minor change is we had to add the words required notification of. So the content remains the same. The only thing we didn't have was required notification. What is exactly underlined was what was changed. And we do it, it's already a practice that we do. We require notification at every IEP meeting. Parents signed off that they were made aware and they were given a policy. So it's just a heading change and then, again, some cross-references, but.
Clarity. Well, you did well, thank you.
Wow, that was easier than going through the
Yeah.
first time, so. But I have more to come, so stay tuned, so. I have a follow-up act that'll.
Again, thank you, Bob.
Thank you for your time and attention.
And thank you, Allison, for helping with the policies. Yeah, cool. We now move on to our informational items, and the board can look those over. And then we will have an executive session this evening, is that correct? So we'll spend, we'll have a 5-minute break here, and then we'll re-adjourn for the executive session. Okay.
Paul, how long do you think the executive session is going to be?
I'm gonna guess at 30 minutes.
Action, no action
No action.
will be taken.
So we'll re-adjourn here in 5 minutes, and then we'll be in action for 30 minutes.
We'll target 8 o'clock. So 25 minutes.
Thanks for coming, Dawn.
Yes.
I feel a little bit singled out that I'm leaving.